So my question is, the fentanyl crisis in Washington has always been a serious issue, but recently it's been getting worse. Fentanyl is a highly addictive, affordable, and fatal pill that many people have had access to. Statistics show that in 2023 there have been 1,000 overdoses in Washington alone, which was a 51% increase from the year before. Governor Jay Inslee signed bills to combat the opioid crisis this year. What actions will you take? What bills or laws will you enforce to make sure that the number of fentanyl overdoses in Washington goes down even more?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question. And I think addressing the fentanyl crisis in Washington is one of the most important challenges that leaders all across Washington are facing in the immediate future. We've seen a really troubling and alarming rise in fentanyl overdose deaths, particularly among young people. And for many years in recent time, Washington was actually one of the top two states in the country that was suffering from youth overdose deaths. So we need to have a holistic approach to make sure that we're treating this as the crisis that it is. And I think really it's starting there with making sure that we are amplifying the scope and the scale and the seriousness of this problem. So we treat it with more seriousness than we have in recent time. There are things that I think the Attorney General's office can do directly to combat this. First and foremost is making sure that we're being a support to all the law enforcement agencies that are trying to crack down from fentanyl coming into our country. This means working with federal enforcement officers, state and local officers to make sure we're stopping as much of the supply that's coming into Washington. And I've done some of that work in my prior role as the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington. But I also know that even if we really are working really hard on the enforcement side, that's not going to be enough because we have so many people that are dealing with some root cause addiction problems. And we need to make sure as a state that we're doing everything that we can to support local agencies and state agencies that are combating people's addiction problems. Another thing I would say is that we need to use the tools of the Attorney General's office to go after and continue to go after those companies that are having loose practices around opioid prescriptions and medications. Part of the reason we have such a serious problem now around fentanyl is that we did not take the crisis seriously to begin with when it came to our medication. And so we allowed people to deal with and build up really severe addiction problems. So we need to combat the illegal fentanyl use, but also regulate and enforce people that are breaking the rules when it comes to medication as well. And the Attorney General has done a lot of that work. But everything that we can do to treat this problem seriously, we need to do it because it is really a huge problem here in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Fentanyl, as you just stated, is a serious crisis here in Washington. A couple of things come to the forefront of my mind. The first being making sure that the Childhood Endangerment Act is rewritten to expressly include fentanyl. In other words, put it in the enumerated list of drugs alongside crystal meth and a couple of other ones. We want to make sure that that gives our prosecutors the opportunity to bring the most serious charges anytime an individual contributes to the death or harm of a child associated with fentanyl. So that's the first thing that I want to make sure we get done. That should be a no-brainer for the folks in Olympia in our legislature. The other one will be ensuring that my team works alongside the United States Attorney's Office, as well as local prosecutors and sheriff's offices, as well as federal and other city police, to make sure that when fentanyl crimes associated with distribution, consumption, or again, harming another are actually prosecuted. We can't just let people keep walking on the street because, as you've mentioned, it typically results in death. So my office will be hyper-focused on making sure public safety as a whole is issue number one, but the fentanyl crisis really works into that. In addition, as you mentioned, there's an opportunity to make sure that we challenge any of the manufacturers, even those who have historically manufactured opioids and fentanyl legally. And so with that element, we'll want to make sure that as Attorney General Ferguson, and as you mentioned, Governor Inslee, that we're actually continually pushing the gas on any of those folks who have distributed fentanyl legally to make sure that they're doing so in a controlled environment. So I look forward to tackling this crisis. It's a really sad epidemic we're suffering, but it's going to be a top priority for me. Thank you.